Good afternoon, Netroots. How's everyone doing? Thank you all for participating in our session today. We're so excited to share our experiences, best practices, and opportunities for you all to engage in similar work in your respective communities. My name is Devin Barrington Ward. I serve as the Managing Director of the Black Futurists Group. I'm also a candidate for Atlanta City Council, and I've been a community organizer in and around Atlanta and in the Washington, D.C. area for the last 15 years. And I'm going to hand it over to someone that you all are probably more familiar with, my good friend, my sister friend, Park Cannon, State Representative Park Cannon. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, Devin. Hey, Netroots. It is awesome to be with you. My Yorkshire Terrier is here with us, and his name is Congress. He is a democracy dog, and so we would love for you to, of course, let us know what you're up to. Drop it in the chat. Where are you from? Have you ever been to Atlanta? What do you know about Atlanta? What we know here is that we are millennials, and we have been a part of direct actions. Specifically, we have worked on organizing direct actions, and we have also been impacted by negative consequences because of it. And so we want to provide today a little talk back between the two of us of some of our experiences, and also engage with you on the questions that you may have, and share some of our next steps. As much of a state representative as I am also an activist. I am proud to call myself an activist elected official. And so you will periodically see me participating in or organizing actions. And that's exactly why. Now, we want to make sure that y'all know where we're coming from, who we're organizing through. And so there are so many different organizations that we rock with. We both have our own consulting firms and groups that do this work. But there was one group called Southerners on New Ground, SONG. And SONG was headquartered here in Atlanta as well for a while, had some other locations. And so they came together in the summer, I think, of 2016, and put together something that was recorded here in District 58, but really resonates around the world. And they call it the Mandate.
Yes. But before we get into that, why don't you tell people a little bit about District 58?
Yeah, District 58 is Midtown Atlanta, Downtown Atlanta, and Southwest Atlanta. So when you look at the King Center, the place where Dr. King literally is laid to rest with his wife, and his church, that is kind of one of the epicenter locations. But you also have so many different organizing groups headquartered here in District 58. I'm talking the Movement for Black Lives, people who are coming up through different, organizations, Georgia Stand Up, the IBEW building, Community Movement Builders, a group that literally put some beautiful art on their wall that said, "Stop gentrifying our neighborhood," and the police came and told them that they were doing graffiti.
Right.
They tried to sue them. And so we were ready to be up in direct action arms.
Right.
And so, we definitely want to let people know that elected officials, and Devin will be one soon. His election is November 2nd in just 3.5 weeks.
Yep.
But elected officials should be knowledgeable about the differences between, just situations that happen out of the blue and organized actions. We are proud to be a part of organized actions, and we will never say that we're not.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we're just out here willy-nilly. I mean, this takes resources, strategy, comrades, squabbles, reconciliation, negotiation. It takes a lot.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we can get into is talking about first, what is direct action organizing from, our individual perspectives. And so I'll start off. I view direct action organizing as an essential part to a broader strategy to move power for communities that are seeking change and a shift in the status quo. So for me, as someone who, has been doing community organizing work really, I would say since 2006, but started doing it from a Black politic, being connected to organizations with the movement for Black Lives. For example, I was the first co-chair of the DC chapter of BYP 100. We always recognize that our public policy demands typically had to be propelled with some sort of direct action, right? And so an example of that would be here in Atlanta, we've been involved in a campaign to close and reimagine the extra jail downtown into a center for equity, wellness, and freedom led by organizations like Women on the Rise, Black Futurists Group, the Racial Justice Action Center, and others. And while there was robust public policy, we had meetings with city council members, we had legislation that we helped create. There was also some very clear direct action that was attached to applying pressure to those who are in decision-making positions to actually do more as it pertains to moving that public policy forward. And so oftentimes I talk about it as an inside-outside strategy, right? So the inside strategy is the advocacy around a specific piece of legislation, but the outside strategy is that pressure campaign that oftentimes direct action organizing can actually afford people. So that's how I view direct action organizing. What about you?
Definitely, just jumping right off of where you left it, the inside outside game. As an elected official since 2016, I have had to really think about what are ways that I want people's voices to continue to be heard in government spaces where there is some level of coordination so that ultimately the burden falls on me. If at the end of the day they're going to say that people were protesting, I am going to need to be able to have some documents and some things that show no, this wasn't protesting. This was an intentional uprising. We have a permit. There's strategy around this. There's been financing and resources and community, decision making that has happened. And these are our demands. I find direct action organizing to be so important for elected officials to demystify and destigmatize, because elected officials too should and do participate in that. For example, in 2019, when they were trying to ban abortion in the state of Georgia, we as legislators came together and were like, we want to do something. We don't necessarily want to be sitting here on the House floor pretending like nothing is happening. We want to be able to engage in, systemic action that will be able to address the unmet needs that we're seeing within the chamber. So we harked back to the first time they tried to ban abortion in 2012, to which my previous sitting lawmaker, Simone Bell, sat on the floor, wrapped herself in caution tape, and included a lot of other organizers and legislators in that, banner drops and things that happened of that sort. So fast forwarding back to 2019, we decided we were going to have hangers, wire hangers, hanging from our desk. We were going to have bottles of bleach sitting on our desk. And for a moment, got to be honest, it frustrated some of the reproductive community, because it was like, we're not trying to add this false narrative that is the only way that abortion is accessed. And we were like, that's a fair assessment. But we are in very dangerous waters, and we need to sound the alarm right now within the chamber. So direct action organizing always looks like, to me, pushing it a little bit more than what people expect or want, but knowing that there's strategy behind it.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that example of direct action organizing. An example that I would share is shortly after the murder of Rayshard Brooks by the Atlanta Police Department here in the city of Atlanta last year. There was, of course, already energies in the street because of George Floyd and the murder of Breonna Taylor and so many other Black people who lost their lives to police violence and over-policing in Black communities. And over-policing in Black communities. And so those of us who were already doing reform work and work around reimagining the public safety system in Atlanta, saw that it was important that we incorporate ourselves into what we called the chatter of the street, the energy that was taking place in the street, the holistic energy that was taking place in the streets. And so myself and other organizers with BYP 100, the Movement for Black Lives, Solutions Not Punishment Collaborative, Liberation House, and other well-respected organizations here in Atlanta and abroad converged down to the site where Rashad was killed at the Wendy's right off of 75-85 in the heart of downtown. And we were able to take the energy of the people in the street and inform them about the Rayshard Brooks amendment that was being developed, that I had the opportunity to work on through the Black Futurists Group as a response to the murders of Rayshard Brooks and so many other people who've been killed by police violence in the city of Atlanta. But we also knew that it was an opportunity to really propel that policy demand through a direct action. And so we were able to take the energy of thousands of people in the street down there, and we marched to 75-85 on the freeway, and we shut the freeway down. And we actually did that in a way that was not just ad hoc, it was very coordinated. We knew that we were talking to folks from, that we were talking to our white allies about what does it mean to actually put your body on the line for the larger fight for Black liberation. And so we were able to orchestrate with white allies that they would be the ones on the front lines to actually take an arrest inside, to show solidarity, to show support, but also to be strategic. And we'll get into more of that later as we talk about best practices. But we wanted to do that because it was important that no Black folks be further harmed that evening. And we knew that, and we know that oftentimes law enforcement takes a different posture towards larger groups of white protesters than they do groups of Black and brown protesters.
Period.
And so sometimes in direct action organizing, it's making calculated decisions around who's on the front lines as far as how we keep our people safe. So I want to take a shift and we're going to show, we're going to screen share. I think it's going to work.
Yeah.
And Park, do you want to introduce the video?
Yes. So this is actually an organized civil disobedience that amplified the call for longstanding local demands. And it was specifically when Alton Sterling was killed and Philando Castile was killed, as well as Jerry Williams. And so, of course, there was heavy police and state surveillance that tried to attempt, to halt and to block us as organizers, but we wouldn't falter. And instead, we put out the mandate. The mandate is spoken in this phrase by Mary Hooks, who at this moment has been, awarded and applauded around the world, but most importantly for Atlanta, stands up as a beacon of the most radical as well as loving sisters within the movement. Just a really powerful energy through not only song, Southerners on New Ground, but also Black Lives Matter Atlanta and the Movement for Black Lives. So we look forward to sharing with you the mandate, and we hope that in the chat you will put, what your thoughts are as you see it and as you hear it.
All across the nation, from Baton Rouge to Asheville to Minnesota, Black bodies and police violence is showing that this country is crushing under the weight of white supremacy. Black leadership, y'all said to us, every generation has a demand. And you're right, we do. Here's what it is. Divest from prisons, jails, courts. The vision of justice for us does not include cages. The vision of justice for us allows us to walk in our communities with safety and dignity for all Black people, those that are differently able, Black women, Black children, queer bodies, trans women, all of our brilliance deserve that. That is public safety. So whoever's defining it, come talk to us, because we have a different vision. Get behind it or get beside us, and just getting ready. And to all of our people who are listening, all of the people across the country right now, all of our people in solidarity right now, from Canada to South Africa, all of our people in Palestine right now, this is a different moment that we are in. We have a mandate. We have a mandate. And damn it, we gon' do it. Call and respond. Call and respond. Call and respond. Call and respond. The mandate for black people in this time. The mandate for black people in this time is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors. Is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors. To earn the respect of future generations. To earn the respect of future generations. And be willing to be transformed in the service of the work. And be willing to be transformed in the service of the work.
Yeah. And that's been something that a mandate that has been shared at numerous direct actions throughout the city, throughout the state, and anywhere Mary Hooks is offering her brilliance to the movement. And so as you hear about the mandate, it's also an opportunity to figure out how are we being strategic around that mandate. It is very powerful, but also intentionally lofty words, right? Around avenging the suffering of our ancestors, right? And so that's not just done through showing up to a protest. I mean, sometimes it is. But when we're talking about a strategic direct action, it is being intentional around, what is your checklist that is necessary and needed to make sure that you have a successful direct action? Who is going to be coordinating or monitoring the movements of law enforcement? When we did a direct action that I also had the opportunity to co-lead with some of the folks that you actually saw in that video. We were in front of the governor's mansion, and it was clear that there was an escalated posture from law enforcement. And so one of my good friends and comrades, Jonathan Likes, made it a point to take a point on monitoring and keeping some sort of open channel of communication with law enforcement on sites, just so that we would be aware of any potential movements or escalation patterns or tactics. I know sometimes it seems unconventional in a direct action in a protest where you are protesting the state, where you are protesting law enforcement, where you are protesting the powers that be that are harming Black and brown bodies daily. But also do not forget the importance of keeping people on the ground and at that direct action as safe as possible. Who are going to be your people that are monitoring and doing security, right? Making sure that there are not counter protesters that are infiltrating the efforts that you all have through your direct action, making sure that any exits or routes that are needed for exit, if there needs to be a mass exodus of folks for safety reasons, who's helping coordinate that. Also having someone as the advance team. Who are the people that are going to go and check out the site for direct action before people actually converge on the space, so that there's a clear understanding around the exits, a clear understanding around where people need to park, where people shouldn't park. One of the things that we realized shortly at the governor's mansion was that many of the streets that people were parked on, the response from law enforcement was to actually boot and tow cars. And so those are things that, we still have to think about when we're doing direct action. Who's going to be the person responsible for dissemination of material and information? When you have a critical mass of people that are there, you want to make sure that you're sharing as much information as possible around demands connected to public policy, around around demands connected to public policy, around resources that are available. We also recognize, as people who are working in the political space, that the pathway to liberation is not solely done through the political system, right? And so as we are also at these direct actions, who is sharing information around community-led and grassroots initiatives and interventions for violence interrupters in our community, for conflict resolution and transformation, for mental health services. All of those things are information that should be thought about in terms of how it's going to be shared. Sometimes people do it where they send out a airdrop the information. Other times it's old school with the flyer. Sometimes it's a QR code. Sometimes it's even as old school as call and response. We saw in that video Mary Hooks doing the call and the response, so that way people can retain the information. Who's going to be your chant leader to make sure that the energy is high? What chants are you going to center in those direct action experiences? Those are some of the things that you want to make sure as you're putting your direct action checklist together that you're considering, and that you have resources and volunteers and comrades that can fill and stand in the gap in those spaces. So that way it's as rich of an experience as possible.
Definitely. And also, we just want to continue to open this space up for people to share their experiences with direct actions. And we're seeing this come through in the chat. So thank you for talking about what you've been through as a member of the labor movement. And this kind of ideas about, jail, no bail. I do think that what we have, of course, realized as I faced arrest this year and you faced arrest 3 years ago, and it was all at the same place, and it was all kind of around the same types of direct actions. And we'll both speak to our experiences because they were different. But what we knew at that point was we have to have systems in place so that regardless of people being jailed, they do have access to bail if they need it.
Absolutely.
But if there are people who don't want to be bailed out, there also has to be respect for that. People have to understand that when you are working with folks of all different walks of life, there are so many different reasons why someone might or might not do something. But we have to at least have a way to talk it through and negotiate it out. For example, there was a day that there was another legislator who the abortion ban was being passed, and she decided that she was okay going to jail that day. And her name is Renita Shannon. She's a state representative here in Georgia. So she turned to me and she said, by no circumstances, remove me from the well. Instead, show me solidarity by coming down to the well if you want to do anything. And what we saw instead was other Black lawmakers come,
specifically men,
specifically come and try to remove her and talk her down, come on, it's time now, it's time now.
You've done what you came here to do, I think was what one of the legislators said.
Which proves the point of the people who we were trying to have the direct action against.
Right, around autonomy of a woman's body and the decision to literally decide to stand in the gap and make the decision that you're going to get arrested in response to the war that's being waged on women's reproductive rights. And so that's another thing in your checklist. As you're organizing this direct action, is it a direct action that is going to result in arrest, right? So for example, when we did the direct action at the governor's mansion, it was clear that with the organizers that were on site, that we were not comfortable based on what the assessment that we had with the crowd, the conversations that day, that we were not comfortable with people taking an arrest. And so once we saw that the police were in a posture around arrest, we at that point, a posture around not just arrest, but we're mobilizing tear gas and rubber bullets and other tactics that just was not necessary for a crowd that was full of peaceful organizers. But we recognized one of the chants as we were closing out is, we're not violent, they are, in the sense of recognizing that we are not an inherently violent people as we are advocating and fighting for the right to life, right? Because we are also, as Black people and brown people, fighting for the right to life. and as we are to live free from oppression. And so as we were seeing that the police were becoming in that type of formation to arrest folks and to gas folks and to beat folks with batons and other things, we made the decision as organizers that day that we were going to disperse because we knew that we were in a season of uprising. And that we needed to make sure that our people were out so that we could continue to organize, right? But a few days later, when we were on the bridge after the murder of Rayshard Brooks, it was clear that people were willing to take an arrest. And so one of the things that we go through when people are talking about taking an arrest is talking about, one, do you have any prior charges, right? So after my arrest in 2018, until my charges were dropped, when I would go to direct actions, it was clear, I made it clear with my comrades and other people on site that I was unable to take an arrest because I would not be offered bail initially based on the fact that I had already had open charges for civil disobedience. I think it was, what was the charge? It was disturbing the General Assembly while it was in session, which actually
it was not,
and the charges were dropped, and I'm still in federal court suing the Georgia State Patrol for that arrest.
And then they did the same thing to me, gave me the same charges, which would have been 8 years. Felony, would have taken away my right to vote, but to serve, be a legislator, all of it. And so as we talk about this idea of do you remain in jail or not, there's a needs assessment that just has to happen before the action happens.
Because we can't do one of the things, I think sometimes we get caught up in the what's the word that I'm looking for? I think sometimes we get caught up in the emotions of what folks like Gandhi and Dr. King and other leaders have said around civil disobedience and direct action organizing. I think Bayard Rustin talked about filling the jail cells until they overflow. But we also have to recognize that we are now in a different space of what mass incarceration actually means, that these charges can be enhanced where people freedom can be taken away. And so when you are organizing these type of direct actions, you need to make sure that people are consenting, right, to the decisions that they may be making or not making around their potential freedom.
Their child care.
Right? People are taking care of elderly folks. People are taking care of children. People are taking care of other responsibilities, jobs. If we're dealing with working class people, we have to recognize that if we're telling them to take an arrest and we don't have any resources to get them out, they could potentially lose their job. They could potentially lose their housing. They could potentially lose their safety net. And so all of those are things that when you are organizing direct action, I think it's important to take into consideration.
And remember, and so we were going to ask each other this question at the end, but I'm just going to skip to it real quick. What was one of the funniest moments, in direct action organizing? And I had to think about it, and I can laugh about it now, but in that moment, it was terrifying. Mm-hmm. Devin had been arrested. I didn't know that he was the one who was being arrested. And so I'm in the state capitol up on the top, and I just see someone with blonde hair. He had blonde hair at that time.
Blonde hair. Okay, cute. Goldilocks.
And so I have the video. And so I come over the top of the stairs and I say, "What's your name? What's your name?" And I'm recording and I run down the stairs. I run outside to the paddy wagon, and it's a double-sided window, and so you can see out, but you can't see in, and you can barely hear in, but you can hear out. And so I have my ear pressed up to the glass, and I'm asking people how many people are inside of this paddy wagon. What are people's names? Does anyone have any medical, needs? Does anyone have any medicines that they need access to? Which, of course, is another thing that you have to look out for when we're thinking about people being incarcerated. How are they going to regulate the medicine that they might need in their body? Mm-hmm. And so I'm asking for names. And he says one of our close friends. And I'm like, wow, that's our close friend. And then I'm like, Devin?
And then the van drives off.
I had no clue it was him.
The van drives off. Yep.
I know, Congress, crazy. So, and we're in a movement space right now. So we've got, a movement dog who does therapy for us. We've got someone else who works with Mary Hooks. Shout out to all the work that they do around Atlanta. But definitely just thinking about in those moments where so much is happening at once, it has to be strategy that brings you back. So I knew, regardless of when the paddy wagon leaves, I'm going to write up a press release to go to the jail, to have everyone meet at the jail. We're going to be there because it was 14 of y'all.
Georgia 15. It was 15.
15, including a state senator.
Who's now took Congressman Lewis's seat.
Right.
Nikema Williams.
Yeah. Nikema Williams. So we knew that the strategy was everyone moved from off Capitol Hill site to the next site. And in this instance and in this day and age, I want to be very clear. There might be some folks where violence is a part of their direct action. It might be. For me and for mine, I am always partaking in the most nonviolent options ever. And so trying to think about what role you want to play. If you want to play a role that includes violence, don't implicate other folks who might not be able to have that on them.
Consent is so is so important. So again, revisiting that checklist, I hope folks are taking notes around the checklist. You also want to make sure that you have someone that's some ones that are designated around first aid and medical response, right? Because anything can happen at a direct action. I'll take you all back to 2015. I was at the first movement for Black Lives convening in Cleveland. And we did an impromptu direct action de-arresting a 12-year-old that had been arrested by the transit police accused of drinking in public. But this child was scared, and we were very clear that, well, the police can't do, even if he was drinking in public, what are the police going to do? You can't render aid. You can't, taking him to jail isn't going to do anything. Call his parents. They refused to call his parents. And so at that point, Jason Perez, a former member of BYP 100, a founding member, said, surround the car. And we all surrounded the squad car. Reinforcements were called. And at that point, the police had sprayed a massive cloud of pepper spray into the crowd, and people started running. And as people started running, people tripped. People twisted ankles. People, of course, were hit directly in the face with pepper spray. And so just even knowing, like, making sure that you have milk available instead of water to get pepper spray out of your eye. You feel like that's something that's so simple, but in the moment when it's required, having someone that has that knowledge and that skill and that is willing to stand in that gap is extremely important. Also, recognizing and figuring out which organizations are going to be supporting bail. How do people access that bail? Who are going to be your legal representations or legal observers, right? So are you tapping on folks from the ACLU or, Black attorneys who are vested in civil rights law or whatever the case may be? Who are going to be those folks that are serving as legal observers? So if there is a moment where law enforcement is seen clearly violating people's rights and abusing folks, that you have that type of legal advisement on site, so that way folks can move accordingly. And so you really want to make sure that when you're doing this type of direct action, you're also aware of, Laura brings up a really good point in the chat. How do you stay safe with these new laws, for instance, allowing motorists to essentially run over protesters without any legal consequences? I think it's important that, one, when you're doing direct action, you are aware of the laws that govern protesting, civil demonstrations in your community. So that way you can be aware of whether or not you are breaking the law and moving accordingly, right? Or if the police are saying that you're breaking a law and you actually are not breaking the law, right? And so that's why it's important to know about that. But to answer your question, Laura, I think it's really important that, one, that is when movement has to get and direct action organizers have to get creative and have to get smart. So if, for example, you are doing a march or a protest, it would make sense to have vehicles maybe a part of your protest to serve as a blockade to the people who are on the street, who are walking, to the pedestrians who are a part of the protest on the ground. So that way there is an additional barrier of protection, right? And so we don't just let things happen. We get smart, we get organized, we get creative, and we tap into folks. I know, for example, many people in the car community here in Atlanta have offered their services to folks who are doing direct action organizing, because they recognize sometimes that they are unjustly targeted by law enforcement. And so they have a vested interest. Motorcycle groups, Black motorcycle groups have also stepped up and said, we will escort you all. So that way, that is one of the ways that you protect people who are walking on the street from someone who feels empowered around these ridiculous laws. And I'm not sure where that bill has passed. I know it's been introduced in Florida. But of course, if we see it introduced in one place, another jurisdiction will try and mimic it.
And it's good because in situations like that, normally what would be recommended would be to reach out to the local police department and to say, oh, we're going to have a protest. We want y'all to have garbage trucks from the city to come and to block the side streets. Like, we were planning the March for Reproductive Justice last weekend, and there was this conversation within the security team as to whether or not we were going to request garbage trucks, so that as the thousands of people move from the state capitol to the Center for Civil and Human Rights, if we wanted to make sure that people wouldn't be hit by motorists who dissent with us marching. And we ultimately had to decide as a group, no, we didn't want the city garbage trucks to be our protectors. We wanted to be our own protectors. And so those opportunities for, Black bike groups or groups of car club interests to provide that service, it can do so much to de-escalate just from a basic standpoint that we don't want to be overlooked. And
right. Well, also, like, we're not to be played with. We're not to be engaged in that type of form of aggression, because we will protect ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Also, shout out to the Black gun groups that have come to many of the protests. Huey P. Newton Gun Club, for example, who have come to protest during the summer of uprising last year to offer protection. And while that is also something to consider, we recognize that we are in a space where some folks may feel uncomfortable. Some of our comrades and colleagues may feel uncomfortable with that display of force, while others may feel comfortable with it, right? And so it's like also trying to, there's the saying, read the room, right? And so figure out, of course, you're not going to be able to accommodate everyone and every need for every person that is engaging in your direct action. But the goal is to try and create a space that is as welcoming, as safe, as empowering, but also not giving people the false expectation that you are, anytime that you engage in a direct action, you are putting your body on the line, right? There are different degrees to which you are putting your body on the line, right? Are you the person that is leading the protest? Of course, if you are the person or persons that's leading, you're putting yourself in a different level of visibility, harm, all those things. Another thing that you should add to your checklist is aftercare, right? So one, making sure, I know Park has talked about the little ones, right? Making sure that there is arrangements for folks who have children, around arrangements for childcare, but also after the protest, right? How are we providing self-care opportunities for self-care to people who have engaged in something that may have went well, but may not have went well, or even if it went well, it was still very triggering and emotional and hard. I know after my arrest, I had to go to therapy, and
I'm still in therapy.
I'm still in therapy.
Mentally, thinking about the time that last summer, we keep referring to last summer because it was a hot summer in Atlanta. If y'all were here, if y'all looked and saw, there was just so much going on right here. And with the CNN, the militarization from at CNN, and people are going through COVID. And at the same time, people are trying to clamor for justice for people whose lives have been taken, children's lives, young people's lives, people in their 20s, other millennials, older folks. But ultimately, we organized a group of young folks to go on a bus ride. We called it a Good Trouble Ride. And they came from Atlanta, and they went down to where Breonna Taylor was unjustly murdered in Louisville, Kentucky. And then they drove to North Carolina for another person's life and spoke on his death and stood in solidarity with the folks there. And they did it all in one day. And so that morning when they left at 4 a.m., I climbed out of my bed in my star pajamas and went out there, and we split them up into teams for the 3 buses by color. And, you stick with your color the entire time because we're going across state lines here. So know who your pack is, know who your people are, and led them through a series of stretches, de-escalation tactics, mindfulness, breathing opportunities, because they needed to have those headed towards there. So even though it was 4 o'clock in the morning, they would not arrive until 9. They needed to already be prepared to replicate that later on that day. And when they came back about 12 o'clock that next morning, I was there, and we did the same thing as a calm down. And I just want people to really think deeply about how they can engage in direct action, even if they don't want to be all the way on the front lines. There are so many options, like you said.
Support,
bring
provide
some milk,
resources, food.
That
also is something on your checklist. Like, I know it seems like that's a no-brainer.
Not just the golden grams.
Right.
Okay?
Not just the golden grams. Congress agrees, right? We need something with a little bit more sustenance. We also need brain food, right? Tea, things that's going to keep people calm, right? And
essential
oils. Also making sure that doing an assessment on who is your core anchor team, your kitchen cabinet, so to speak, of people that you're organizing this direct action with. Doing an assessment on what are people good at and what are people not good at, and let people self-assess. For example, I'm typically never the one at a protest that is assigned the responsibility of engaging with law enforcement, right? That's very triggering for me.
Yeah, me
I've been arrested. I've seen my father beat up by the police. When I was 5 years old, I saw several police officers jump on top of my dad in a case of mistaken identity. And so for me, that task is not the appropriate task for me. But the appropriate task for me is, because I have a really big mouth, I'm usually one of the chant leaders. I'm usually one of the people who are doing the call and response, one of the people that's helping keep the energy up in the action. And that is so important and imperative, because you don't want the worst thing to happen is having a direct action where the energy is low, right? Because then people leave, then the target of your direct action is, doesn't take you seriously.
Yeah.
Even if it's 10 people out there, you want 10 people who are on high energy when they are there, right? The other thing is, every direct action should have a direct target. Who is your target, right? And it shouldn't be just general, we're targeting the state. Who in the state? Is it the governor? Is it the Republican leadership? Is it the Speaker of the House? Is it one bad Democrat that decides they want to vote for abortion bans, right?
Right.
Who is your target? Is it the mayor? Is it, whatever the case may be, you want to have a clear target and what's your demand. And you also want to be able to have the core organizing team needs to be able to illustrate and explain that demand. But also the people, one of the things is such a missed opportunity that's happened so many times. People will come to direct actions and leave unclear on what the demand was. The direct action is really it's I would almost call so many of the direct actions that I've been at have had a target, was a part of a multi-pronged pressure campaign, but it also felt like a revival, right? It was an opportunity for me to be empowered, to sit in collective and synergizing energy. I was going to say synergistic. I don't know
Yes,
if
honey, making
synergistic.
up words.
Energy that is synergizing and that is empowering and inspiring. So that way, when you go to your respective communities or your respective role in broader movement, you leave empowered around not just the good feelings, not just the connections, not just the empowerment that comes along with like fighting back, but you also leave very clear on what the goal is. So that way you're able to articulate that goal, that target, that demand in your respective places where we should all be doing our pieces and parts around moving us forward towards a vision of freedom and liberation.
Ooh. So let's talk about your vision. You created the Black Futurists Group.
Yep.
Plural futurists.
Yep.
Because there's multiple of us.
Yes.
There's multiple futures that we can see. We're going to screen share a little bit.
Yep.
So that y'all can have access to this beautiful dynamic website, and you can go there later on and of course look and consult with him in the future. But the goal really of this future, tell us about what you're doing, and I'll scroll.
Yeah, so the Black Futurists Group is the work that I am proud to do as an organizer, because there is no future for any of our communities. There's no future for the world if there is not a future that is safe, that is prosperous, and that has an expected end for Black people, right? And that end should be an end that ends in liberation and justice. And so it is my broader contribution to the struggle for human rights is through focusing on the least of these, because I believe that when those who have been oppressed for so long actually have a future, that the rest of us will also have that opportunity as well. And so you can see some highlights of our work, talking about reimagining public safety and how we dismantle, divest from the Atlanta Police Department and create something that is really grounded in collective public safety. And we want to do that because we recognize that, doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And it is insane to expect that we continue to double down on traditional police funding, and crime rates in Atlanta have not dropped. They have actually gone up every year that the budget has gone up for the police department. We can't continue to do that and expect that our communities are going to be safe. We've also done work around making sure that health disparities like HIV is actually something that we are prioritizing city resources around. So we were proud to help create a dedicated funding line in the city budget for HIV PrEP services in Atlanta, which since has been expanded from $100,000 now to, I believe, $250,000 in the budget each year. And then also we've been working with the University of Houston and Emory University around increasing the capacity for trauma-informed public policy and advocacy with organizations doing work, social justice work in the South. We're funded by several organizations, including Drug Policy Alliance. We do consulting work with the Black AIDS Institute. We've been an anchor team member on the campaign to close the Atlanta City Detention Center. We have supported work with the Movement for Black Lives. We helped expand the Atlanta Fulton Pre-Arrest Diversion Initiative as an alternative to traditional policing. We've done national policy work with the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS and so many others. And so I'm excited about the work that the Black Futurists Group continues to do and how we are building a future where all of us can truly thrive.
Yes, and so based behind the Black Futurists Group, y'all, right here, Devin Barrington Ward, who's also, the candidate for city council. I do think that what we also have to remember is like elected officials, whether they just become it or they've been it already, they can work outside of just being an elected official. And it can happen to be that they're working in the movement for liberation. Mm-hmm. And so that's the work that I do. That's the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Right now, all I have publicly, because of so much going on, is really the campaign, Park Cannon's campaign thinking about how we continue to get me reelected. It is important. I do think that people have to continue to remember that if they've supported me before, they might have enjoyed it then, but they might want to do it again, because it's also a seat at the table for many times for us to de-escalate. And so,
talk to me a little bit about what the importance of having progressive elected officials as we try to move forward work that is grounded in the demands of movement.
Gladly. And so right now we're clamoring for people to realize we're not just knocking on your door just to ask you to vote for a party, especially because these are nonpartisan races in the city levels. We're asking you to vote for progressive members of our community. And the reasons that we are doing this is because we know that there are tangible differences that we will see happen as it relates to policy and to progress. People's lives depend on empathy, period. If you have elected officials who are not thinking about the most progressive angle, the angle that has been least understood, who are trying to get that misinformation to be on record discredited, then we're in the same places we have always been. Being a progressive, elected official in Atlanta, Georgia, you would think would be easy. You would think I would be in community. And in fact, I am not in community because there aren't many progressive elected to the city council or to the state in the city of Atlanta. So when you have one or two progressives, me and Renita Shannon at the state level, every now and then B. Wynn and David Dreyer, at the state level doing that work, and we try to speak with our local folks and we don't have any progressives there, I mean, it's a moot point. We can't do anything with it. So that's why when we had the Rayshard Brooks bill last year, it never got passed. That's why when we did the bill to input the 7 policies that police officers should do, the 8 can't wait. When we had the city council pass 8 can't wait, but then it got vetoed because there were no progressive elected officials to stand for it.
We've had a lot of people have heard about Cop City in Atlanta. We're tearing down 90 acres of forest in the city of Atlanta to build a 90-acre military-style police training facility in the city of Atlanta. This facility would be larger than the New York Police Department's training facility, larger than Chicago's, larger than Los Angeles,
larger than LAPD.
And those agencies have way more, thousands and thousands of police officers compared to the 2,000 police officers with the Atlanta Police Department. And so it is important that we have strong progressives at the local level. So as we close out, this is an opportunity. I think we've got 5 minutes or so for some questions. So we love all of the engagement that we're seeing in the chat. I see people are connecting in the chat. I see people getting organized. That's how it starts. Even with COVID, we can be organized in a way that builds power. Yes, we are telling you that is the job of a futurist, right? Is to share nuggets around where we are going and how to get there. And this is not the only pathway. This is one pathway. I cannot stress that enough, but it's imperative that it's an important pathway. And so it's imperative that we have this conversation. I really hope that people were taking notes about the checklist that you should be putting together when you're doing a direct action. This by no means is an exhaustive list, but it's a list to get you started. But I would check in with organizations that have a history of direct action organizing for support. So Southerners on New Ground, the Movement for Black Lives, Midwest Academy, and so many others nationally and locally offer these really great resources and tips to direct action organizing. One other piece that I would be remiss if I left out, movements like the HIV prevention and treatment movement has been engaging in direct action organizing since the start of the epidemic. And so it's really important to also lean on folks who do work in the HIV space, people who are doing work around reproductive justice. I think a lot of times when we think about direct action, it's typically always in the realm of direct action connected to police terrorism and brutality. But there are so many other areas that require direct action: housing, health, reproductive justice, obviously, education, and all these other things.
Yes, come on, connect with others who are interested in including trans narratives in movement work. Do you remember that time that we were at the annual MLK March? And, you know, we love it. We love it. It's on MLK Day in January, but it's ultimately like led by civil rights leaders from that era. Most of the chants that are being said are "We shall overcome," kind of those songs. And so remember when we were like, hold up, no. They're talking about Black Lives Matter, and we were talking about Trans Lives Matter, Black Trans Lives Matter. And then it got into a moment between the intergenerations where the generations were like, hold up, we ain't saying all that. And we were like, well, we saying it or we not here. Right. So then we did a die-in.
It means either all of us or none of us when we're talking about Black liberation. I also want to shout out organizations like Solutions Non-Punishment Collaborative, that have been doing direct action organizing work from a trans-led model. We do a lot of work with them. As you see on the Black Futurists Group website, we've done some consulting work with them in the past and remain a partner when it makes sense for us to partner.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, we should most certainly, because one of the most brilliant historic examples of direct action organizing is Marsha P. Johnson. We would not have pride, not to be antagonistic, but to the white gays, baby, we would not have pride. We would not have June as Pride Month if it was not for a Black trans woman picking up a brick and throwing it at who?
Bling.
The police.
Okay.
So it was also not just at per usual with the experiences of trans and Black queer people. It was not a direct action for one aspect of her life. It was the recognition that I am being oppressed because I am Black and trans,
right,
and am woman. And this oppression is coming from society and being enforced by the police. And so I have to take this brick and throw it at NYPD because they are the perpetuators of my oppression.
Yep.
And so that's why it's so important that we uplift those historic narratives, because there's so much brilliance and nuance and intersectionality in those narratives.
And it's popping out right now. I mean, it's Pride Weekend right now in Atlanta, starting tonight. Tomorrow through the weekend, we normally would have the parade and the festival, but because of COVID-19, the main organization is not putting on those events. But we will still be getting together. We will still be in community. And so we wish you the most progressive, positive, powerful time of your life. Now is the time to stay in touch with us.
Yes.
You can stay in touch with me, Park Cannon, on social media. Search Park Cannon. You can also stay in touch with Devin.
Yep. Same thing. Devin Barrington Ward. I'm probably the only Devin Barrington Ward on social media. If you go to another page and it's not me, report it.
Report it.
And you can connect with me. Yes, Congress. And you can connect with me at wakeupatl.org for my campaign for Atlanta City Council. And of course, the blackfuturistgroup.com around my work with the Black Futurists Group. Please stay connected with us. Our email addresses are available on our social media.
And through the app for Netroots.
And through the app. So please connect with us. Thank you, Netroots. And thank you to all of the attendees of this session. Have an amazing weekend.